So, just to recap how we do it, we just do the simple 1 to 10 thing, and we do story, and then gameplay, and then overall. So, starting with the story on Control. Um, there wasn't like a ton of story, as I guess I should say the first thing I'll say about it. It had like cool story elements, and it had like some pretty cool stuff going on, but it definitely wasn't like story focused by any means. Um,
Yeah, no.
you just kind of had a rough outline of things, and then some kind of light story threads that you followed as you played through the game. And there was a lot of lore sort of documentation you could read. It's fairly common in games that don't really have like a good way to tackle the lore in the actual gameplay, because this definitely wasn't like an RPG. But like I kind of said when we first started playing it, I thought the way they did the lore drop documentation stuff was pretty well done, because they weren't overly like lengthy and long-winded, and it was easy to like pick up the thing and then be like, oh, let me read this and quickly like kind of get back to the gameplay. So I didn't really mind it as much in this one as I have in some other games, where I feel like they hide too much lore in the optional reading material, and then that material is like so long-winded that you're like, holy crap, I don't know that I want to read all this. And several times I've started those kind of games and kind of been like motivated to read everything, and then after like a couple of hours of doing that, I'm like, okay, I'm losing it here. It's just like too much. Yeah. So I thought they struck a good balance there. What story there was cool and pretty interesting, because they did a lot of what I feel like they did a lot of storytelling with the world. With the setting and the interaction, and like going through the bureau and going through the different like divisions and stuff like that. Like they told a story with the environment as much as they did with any kind of dialogue or lore drop that you could optionally read, which is a cool thing, because not a lot of games can do that well. That have the environment play an active role in the story, especially if you're talking about like going into the astral plane and stuff like that. Like those kind of moments really, the environment like helps shape the story really really well. And I think they did that pretty well when you're roaming around in the bureau, and you're in those sections that are all shifted and like fucked up, and then you would go and cleanse it, and it would all kind of warp back to the way it's supposed to be. And uh, people get corrupted by the hiss and stuff like that, and like everything kind of played together really well. It had a good like flow to exploring around and feeling like you were learning things as you were just roaming around the world, without there being necessarily like a narrator like explaining things or whatever. So in that sense, I think they did a better job than a lot of other RPGs I've played that have more story and more focus on it. So I almost want to like give it like extra credit for that, because it never like took you out of the game to explain things. You were always like pretty immersed. Everything was always like fairly easy to understand, even though you were dealing with like some kind of crazy supernatural concepts that could be hard to understand, but they really kind of brought it down and made it understandable. Um, I do feel like they were. I do feel like if I was going to strike a negative on it, it would be the fact that they did leave things like pretty like vague in the end, and didn't really commit to anything solidly. Now, that's probably because, at least the gist I got, is because they're going to make more games and continue the lore. But um, getting through both DLCs and the main storyline, you don't really come away from it with any kind of like solid conclusion. You definitely come away with it with like more questions than answers, which it's not necessarily a bad thing if Control 2 comes along and it answers a lot of those questions and you feel like you move forward. But if it doesn't, um, and you just take this game singular by itself, or if what I think may happen, they come out with Alan Wake 2 and they start to tie together more of these elements, um, then you're just going to be left kind of going, I don't really know where this is going. So it's really up to the studio at this point to make sense of this or not. But um, I like Remedy's way of doing storytelling and all that, and they make pretty solid games. All their games really have been pretty good. So I have no reason to assume that like they won't do some follow up. Um, it's very similar to their old games too, because they made like Max Payne, and Max Payne was a lot like that too, where it didn't do like heavy story, but they managed to tell a pretty good story through various light story sections and environmental interaction and stuff like that. Um, so I imagine they'll probably come along and expand on it, but taking it as it is, not knowing whether or not that expansion is ever going to happen, because you can't just assume. I would probably give the story with the environment and stuff like that, like say giving it kind of a little bit of a bonus because I feel like that's something that's hard to do and they pulled it off pretty well. I would probably I'm feeling like a I'm feeling like an 8. I'm feeling like an 8. 7 5 8 kind of range.
Yeah,
That's what I'm feeling.
just feeling about the same. Let's see. Me. Part of the story thing that you forgot to mention is characters. Typically.
Um yeah, I mean the characters were not didn't have like a huge impact for sure in this game. I mean, I didn't necessarily dislike the characters that you interacted with, but you didn't spend a ton of time with them either. I'd say probably the most intriguing character in the game was Darling,
Yeah, Darn was great.
but again, you leave off there not really knowing, what happened to him or what role he actually kind of played in everything, how much he really knew.
Yeah, sad. Yeah, so let's see. Story. Story was different. Definitely an interesting take on the universe or whatever. Like just like its own sort of setting type thing, not from any universe that you typically are, used to. So at least as far as I know. So that was pretty neat. There is kind of interesting, like going through the world and learning about the house and all, how the world itself was through all these different things that you pick up, and a bunch of the environments were pretty neat. See, but one thing I did find annoying though was all the lore pickups and shit, like all that redacted stuff. I kind of found that annoying. I didn't like. I was hoping at like higher clearance levels or something. I mean, you're the fucking director. You should be able to see like what these redacted stuff is. So it's like you don't exactly get a full clue of what all these things are referring to. Like you try to like piece in some areas, and then others is like
Yeah,
I have no idea what goes in here, and it
that
would.
would have been a really cool thing if they had done that actually. Like if you got higher clearance levels and then you started finding unredacted documents, or even if you
It
were able to go back and view the unredacted versions of
Yeah.
documents. That probably would have been cool. That's a good
Yeah, that's
idea.
all I was hoping for, and it's not my idea entirely. Like I thought of it because like there's someone like mentioned it like in the game or something like that. It was like some like only the director has clearance to see these redacted things or some shit. I'm like, oh cool. Hopefully we'll be able to see them later. But nope, that was never the case. So that was kind of really disappointing. I didn't like that, especially because there's so much of it.
Yeah, there
And
was quite a
then
bit, and it set a good tone early on because it was like, oh, you're not supposed to know these things, and
yeah,
you're down here in like the lower levels of clearance and all that kind of stuff. So it felt appropriate at the time, but yeah, I agree. I think it would have been cool had that slowly begun to change.
yeah, and towards the end there, I started get bored of reading through a lot of the documents because some of them were just, I don't know, just rabble nonsense from a bunch of the employees and stuff. I just started skimming through a good chunk of things. It was like, junk. It's just, I don't. Another dude whining about his fucking superior, some weird rumor shit. Just people whining about each other. Just okay. So yeah, at first like there was like a was like a good amount of like pickups and stuff. Like when you first made the comment, like I agreed with you. I was like I liked like the amount that they had going, but then like there's starting to get too much, and then it's just my eyes started to gloss over certain things.
That's fair.
And so let's see. And the ending, it definitely left more questions than answers, which I didn't like, even if they do have a part two. Like, I feel like you accomplished nothing. Like, your journey was practically for nothing. Like, the his fucking thing is still there, and all you did was you accepted being the director. It's like I'm the director now, and then, but the hiss still is here, and we still have a bunch. We're still in lockdown, and a bunch of problems going on. It's like your brother's now in a coma, and that's about it. And yeah, it's like, what did you accomplish during this whole game? Feels like you did nothing. So I really didn't like that. And there's like no boss fight at the end either. Like they took me by surprise. Like you just like the board empowers you to where all your abilities and attacks do a lot of damage. So you're like fucking two-shotting things with like the regular base pistol, like non-upgraded damage mods or anything. Just dicking on everything, and then you just just blow through everything, reach Dylan at the end, and then game over. It's like there's no boss fight. What? That was it? And so yeah, that was pretty lame. So with yeah, and yeah, so I didn't really like that side of thing at all. For the characters and stuff, I like this storytelling bit they did with the hotline and stuff like that. I thought that was interesting. I liked that,
Mhm.
and Darling's definitely the best out of all of them. But I don't know. A lot of the thing was like still kind of confused about the logic with like Trench and stuff. Like he was like corrupted by the his, but like he kept talking about like Darling's the one who's being corrupted by the hiss, and then it's like, is that the hiss making him think that, or I guess it's what I'm supposed to assume. I don't know. It's, it was kind of confusing that aspect of things. So and yeah, As far as the rest about the characters, the main character Jesse Faden, eh, she didn't really feel like she had anything special. She's just not nothing special to say about her really. Just yeah, she's just okay, I guess, as a character. Not particularly interesting. Just some girl who wanted to save her brother, and that was about it. You don't really get to know her too much. Like you got to know her past a bit, but as a character, I don't think they really. I don't think she really shone through at all. And same with a bunch of the other side characters. They were just kind of loose, as like some other Dark Souls games types. It feels like just they're just NPCs there just to give you quests and lead you in a certain direction, and that's typically it. Like they don't have too much beyond that. So yeah. So for story and all that, I'll probably give it like a 7, maybe a 7.5, especially with the the ending and lack of strong characters and stuff like that, which I normally really like, but yeah. So yeah, that's my score for story.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with most of that. It's like they could have done like a little bit more, especially with like the ending. But I, I, but I mean, you have to. The way I kind of look at it as well is like they're obviously like trying to connect it to their other game in the Alan Wake universe, which maybe they kind of wanted to leave it a little bit open so that they could sort of begin to expand on it more in the next game and whatever. But you know, it's it's a valid criticism to expect answers in the current game. Like I can see both sides of it.
I expected a resolution, even if they wanted to tie it to Alan Wake, which I was all for. Like learning about the Alan Wake parts made me interested in the Alan Wake game. I thought that was neat. Like when they do tie it together in like the next Alan Wake or whatever, like I'll be all for that. But the game that you have now, especially since you didn't play the previous Alan Wake or whatever, because I didn't know they were like involved. Like I, there needs to be a resolution. Like there needs to be an end. Like you felt like what you did accomplished something. Like you practically didn't solve anything. It's like if you eliminate the hiss and then something happens in the Alan Wake universe, which it kind of alludes to in the DLC, that like there's a new altered world event going on, and then the to be continued type thing. It's like, oh, okay, cool, that's gonna be tied to that, and she's the director now, so you'll probably be involved. So that'll be cool. But the current situation, I feel like it needed a resolution, which I didn't really get.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like their goal with it was to introduce the Jesse Faden character and introduce uh, the bureau and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of it was about like sort of like bringing all these world elements together and introducing them all to, and then like her journey, because like in the beginning, obviously she chafes anytime anybody calls her the director. She doesn't want to be known as the director. She doesn't want to feel like she's a part of this group of people. She doesn't want anything to do with them. She's just here to find her brother, and she's just like, I sort of got thrown into this whole director thing. But then as you go through the game and she continues to like evolve, by the end of it, she's like, I am the director. So she's gone through like this whole journey of like wanting nothing to do with it, and then at the end accepting that like this is her role. So I think that was kind of the goal of what they wanted the game to be, is that initial like journey, and like how this bureau and everything was going to be led by the Jesse Faden character, and like what her mindset was going to be going forward, because especially like when you're in the Foundation stuff, they talk a lot about like the original first guy that was chosen to be the director, the Northmore character, and how he was like very like uh came off as almost like religious about it, like he wanted to do everything the board told him to do, and he talked a lot about, being chosen and being special and all this other kind of stuff. And he had this very like, you know, devotional kind of mindset. And then you had Trench, who came along, and he, as he says in the beginning, he didn't want to be the director either. He just kind of got thrown into it, and most people seem to describe him as not a very friendly type of character. Didn't really seem to do a whole lot in terms of like leading the bureau, and the way he communicated a lot through the game was talking about like your obligations as a director, not so much anything to do with, you know, where the bureau should be going or anything of that nature. And then you get down to the end of like the Foundation DLC with Jessie, and how she's fully come to accept her role as a director. Not only does she accept her role as a director, she's now saying like, I have to lead the bureau possibly away from the board. That she doesn't trust the board, she doesn't trust the former entity, and she thinks possibly they're both using the bureau and using the director, and that she's gonna, sort of have her guard up and potentially, do go in a completely different direction. So I think a lot of that is like say, I think a lot of it was just like setting all that stage, because it's kind of a lot of stuff to throw at you, and they wanted to sort of lay all that out and give you like Jesse's mindset and her motivation and all that kind of stuff, and get her like established. That's my guess, because that's kind of what it feels like to me. But there's no denying that when you get down to the end, you didn't really have like a solid resolution, and you're not really sure where things are going from here. Like you can guess that, okay, we have to continue to fight the hiss, we've got to deal with that, but you don't come away from it really knowing what the hiss is, where it came from, is the board good or bad. You're kind of just left with a whole lot of questions, which sort of makes sense in the setting in a way, because that's a lot of what obviously the bureau deals with, is a lot of questions without a lot of answers. But um, you know, it just kind of is what it is. I think it's valid to criticize that, but at the same time, I think there's also like a position where you could defend that, and you could say that it did offer like a good journey for the Jesse Faden character, and how she evolves through the game, and comes to accept the role, and all the stuff that she does, and like in the Foundation stuff, how she basically like even defies the board, which I don't think any other director had really done. When she talks to the former and takes on the power that they didn't want her to have, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how all that's going to tie together with Alan Wake exactly, because you hadn't played the Alan Wake game, so you're less familiar with it. But a lot of what happens in the Alan Wake game, like, it is very like supernatural at times, and does some pretty crazy shit. But it's not to the level of like this game is, with Jessie and her powers and the crazy gun and being able to fly and do all the crazy stuff that she does. Like Alan Wake is much more like a Silent Hill kind of game. There's not a ton of like combat per se to it, and you don't have any like superpowers or anything. You're just dealing with the darkness, very similar to how Jesse ends up having to deal with the darkness, which is just fighting it with the light, and that becomes sort of the core mechanic of it. It's not about Alan Wake having some superpower. It's just about him, using the light intelligently to fight the darkness. But the darkness doesn't seem like it's the same as the hiss. It seems to be like it's its own like sort of
Yeah, its own
entity
thing.
of some sort. You know,
It's its own resonance, just like the moss people.
you know. So it'd be interesting to see like how they plan to tie all that together. Like they're in the same universe and all, but like Jesse's obviously a way different type of character with way different sort of power scaling than the Alan Wake character, and I'm guessing if they're putting in this whole Alan Wake DLC and everything, that they're gonna include Jesse in an Alan Wake game, and she would be a part of that story in some way. So that could change things quite a bit. Like, like I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna come together. It'll
Is
be
it just
interesting.
references, or she's
It
just an
might be.
NPC?
It might just be references, but the way they kind of leave it off makes it sound like it's gonna be potentially more than that. But I don't know, because they do say like, oh, we got to get like agents out there, and we got to investigate this and blah blah blah, and then like they get the message and it's like from the future, which I think is meant to say that like the Alan Wake game isn't here yet, but it's coming in the future. I think is what they were trying to communicate. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting. Um, Moving on to the next section though of gameplay. Um, this is sort of an interesting section because I feel like the gameplay was really fun. I enjoyed it. It was simple. There wasn't a whole lot of like fanciness to it, but what it had, I thought was really well done. Like the gunplay was not complex, but it was for the most part very good. I felt like the gun sort of progression was pretty solid. You started out with a really basic gun, and then you kept getting like different types of guns, and they were all good in their sort of scenarios. And then as you upgraded them, they definitely got way better. The mod system, for the most part, like worked, fine. I mean, it could have been better, but it could have been worse. Um, the upgrading system was. I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, the upgrading system, like in my mind, I want to say like the upgrading system. I wish there was more to it because just getting like uh 20% bonus and then 30% bonus and then 40% bonus like is very basic, right? Like there's not a whole lot to that. There's not a whole lot of interesting choices being made. But at the same time, if it were if that were more complex, then it might have detracted from the simple but effective core of the combat system. So there's sort of like a I think a difficult balancing act there of like if we make the upgrading paths and everything more complicated, then it potentially harms the core systems and how they flow very well. But at the same time, when you look at them, they're not very inspiring. They're kind of boring. They're kind of basic. So you're kind of left going, well, I wish there was a little bit more to this. So in saying I wish there was more to it, I also admit that I don't know how they could change it without tampering with the core system too much and detracting from it. That's one of those situations where it's easier to be a critic than it is to be a developer. Um, so I don't necessarily envy them the task of trying to balance those things out, but you know, all I can say is I wish there was more to it, but I don't think I would have liked it to have impacted the core gameplay too much because I thought that was very solid. I thought the progression of all that was good. I liked when you got levitate, it felt like it opened up the game in an interesting way, being able to like float around now. And then as you looked into like being able to like ground slam out of levitate and um, how the gun's sort of interactivity kind of changed a little bit when you got that kind of power, and even getting stuff like dash and stuff like that was a pretty big change. The only power I didn't really like and didn't really use was the rock shield thing. I didn't really use that at all. I just felt like it wasn't didn't really gel with my gameplay choice. I don't like being like more stationary, which is what that kind of is sort of based around. It's more like being a tank or something. I would rather just dodge everything and dominate everything and make it tank for me. So that's kind of the style I went for, and so I never really used the shield. But I guess if that's the kind of thing you prefer to do, it would. I guess it would have worked. I don't really know for sure like how good it was. I didn't even like using it in the astral trial thing where you had to learn how to use it. I just didn't like it from the start, but that's also like my gameplay style. So putting all that together, I feel kind of similarly to the storyline. It's like it was solid. It was like a 7, 8 kind of range. Like there was nothing there that was like transformative or you know really like got your excitement level like pumping per se. But it was very effective and it was very clean and it worked. It didn't need anything more complicated to it. Um, and I kind of like that. I never got bored of it. I guess is probably the best praise I can give it. Like I never got bored of running around and killing stuff because it always felt good to do that. And that's really one of the most important things to nail in any combat system is that combat loop actually fun? Or do you get bored of it, or does it feel too complicated, or does it feel too simple, or you know, is something wrong with it? And I feel like this game didn't have anything wrong with it. It wasn't too simple. It wasn't too hard. It didn't break down in any particular way. It just worked, and it was always fun. Could it have been better? Possibly, but again, that's another one of those situations where I feel like it's easier to be the critic than it is to be the developer. Because if you keep tinkering with those mechanisms too much, you could break the whole thing and take away from the fun factor. But at the same time, as a player, because it is relatively simple but effective, you do kind of have a little bit of this nagging thing in the back of your head where you're like, oh, I wish there was kind of a little bit more. I don't know what, but it would be cool if there was more because what's here is good and I like it, so I kind of want more. Um, so in that sense, it doesn't feel like it can be like a 9 or a 10 because it didn't like explode my brain in any significant way, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment at all either, which I feel like is kind of like in that 7.5 to 8 range of solidness. It was just solid. I think the only real thing that I kind of hated at times was with the charge gun. It would sometimes just impact with I don't even know what fucking pebbles in the air and explode improperly, and that made it pretty frustrating sometimes. You really had to use it while levitating in order to get the full use out of it. Trying to shoot it on the ground at times was problematic, but that was also like a product of the ability to like grab objects and do all the crazy stuff that you could do with the throwing of things and all that. So that was kind of like two different systems sort of colliding a little bit. So that would be like the one somewhat little rough patch in there, but that wasn't significant enough that like you couldn't work with it. And there was only a couple of times where like I just shot myself like point blank somehow accidentally and died and had a frustrating moment. So I'd probably say it's like an 8.
Yeah, fair enough. Me, fun with the combat for the most part. It's pretty enjoyable. Sort of build and the style I went for was fucking mostly Jedi shit, just throwing a bunch of rocks mostly. Even like the gun towards that I was mostly using towards towards half of way towards the end, maybe I guess. I don't know. Was just like the basic gun with increased energy after headshots. So it'd be like expend energy, tap a few people in the head, gain all your energy back, repeat, and just chunking rocks and doing obscene amounts of damage was mostly my play style, which I enjoyed. I didn't get
That's
bored
pretty
of it.
cool that like we played like that's pretty cool because like the combat is not very complex, but we played two different completely ways still. Like I didn't do that at all. Like I didn't use my powers much at all. I mostly relied on my gun and I used my powers very sparingly and I mostly used it um for dominating people and stuff like that. I didn't do a whole lot of chucking stuff around. I would use it sometimes, but usually, mostly only when they had shields, or if it were like the explodey guys and they were all like clumped up. Throw like one object through them all and kill them all and stuff like that. But 90% of the time, I was gunning it.
Mostly chucking stuff because my my check damage and stuff like that did way more than like any of my gunshots did, and I could just spam that a lot more. So I did that, and I did dominate too, but not as much. So yeah, mostly chucking shit. So yeah, it's combat was nice, like with the upgrades and stuff. So like you said, it was simple, but you could play different play styles with it and do like different builds and stuff, which I liked. And as far as like the mods and stuff go with the gun, I think it went well with like your skills and how it interacted. So I think they did a good job with that. The only problem I had was maybe towards like the later parts of the game, you didn't really need to get mods anymore, or like getting new mods was kind of, they just cluttered up your inventory. It was, well, actually I had that problem like the whole game. Just kept getting mods that were like low rarity for like the level you were at, and the mods that you had, like you kept getting like greens and blues, and it was just all garbage stuff. And then you have a small inventory capacity, so it was a lot of time I had to keep going to the inventory and dismantling stuff, and that was just irritating. And there's a good amount of mods, maybe like half of the mods were just garbage type bonuses that you would like never use under any circumstance, and if you did, you were retarded. So like I mentioned before, like the you gain 10% energy recharge after you take charge damage, or after getting hit in melee. You get hit in melee, you practically get one shot, and that's after I had like all the health upgrades.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's
yeah,
true.
yeah. So like, no one in their right mind would use any of those mods, and not to mention those mods you're getting were of low quality too. So again,
Which was
it
which was
was
sort of an interesting thing. It's like it's one of those games, one of those rare games that had no difficulty slider, and like yeah, like you kind of pointed out, it's like even when you had like all the health upgrades, you could still get basically one shot. Which I personally was okay with because it made the combat like tense and stuff like that. There's only like a few times where it was like, well, that was just cheap. It didn't happen too often like that because you had so many things at your like disposal, which I think is kind of their attempt at balancing the fact that you're basically like a fucking superhero with the stuff you're fighting. But yeah, that's there's no way you would forget even just melee. Like there's no way you want to get hit at all. Like everything that hits
yeah,
you hits real hard.
yep. And like I said, like the drops and stuff, like the rarities, and like you're getting like those low rarity drops in like the DLC stages. The DLC stages were like for even people who after they beat the game would
Yeah.
be all in, level 5, level 6 mods already, still getting these trash quality things. Is like, why? So like all these chests and all these new mods and stuff were not even worth really looking at. Just
Yeah, I know one
disappointing.
of the DLCs, I don't know which one. I think Foundation added the Infinity tier mods, like the special mods. So like they did add something in the DLC as far as like a new tier of progression, but
Mm,
you still did get a lot of like really trash drops that obviously they just were worthless at that point in the game. Like you were so far beyond them.
yeah. Yeah, and then so after the point in the game, which you get to fairly quick, like a lot of the discovery and stuff was turned to be disappointing. Just going through and even going back to old places and finding all these chests and and stuff like that was just another esoteric essence thing that you already have like 30 of, or a new blue mod, yay, just turn into the same issue with Assassin's Creed that I keep fucking referencing back to. It's like, yeah, you already
it
have
wasn't
all
nearly as
these.
bad
It
as Assassin's
wasn't near
Creed, but
well, it wasn't nearly as bad, but it got to that point of after you already have all these upgrades and stuff, like you don't need any of what they're giving you. It's just like getting another iron ingot again after
yeah.
you already have your golden weapon and
I
stuff.
think I
So
think the difference I would put between these two though is like Assassin's Creed like literally just keeps feeding you stuff you don't need and
yeah,
there's no reason for it all. Whereas in this case like for me and you, like a lot of the stuff they were feeding you, like you're talking about like the upgrade materials and stuff like that. Yeah, we didn't need them, but like there's a possibility of like players that aren't as thorough as we are or aren't as dedicated to like exploring as we are would have missed a lot of materials and would need them. You know, so it's kind of like that
true.
balancing act of like you have to sort of like put yourself in the position of a more average player, you know, or a more casual player who's not going to as be as thorough or explore as much of the map. Maybe even just generally doesn't have as high a gamer IQ. You know, they just miss things or they don't know the kind of telltale signs of like I think there's something hidden over here. You know, like people miss stuff. So
Yeah,
you have to kind of
got a
sprinkle
good
that out a
point.
little bit. You know.
Yeah, not so yeah, not as bad as Assassin's Creed, but I won't knock it too much, but it did
I mean, I do think
lose
they should
the.
have been rolling you higher level stuff
It should
in the
have.
DLC.
I think so.
You know, I don't think dropping blues at the post in-game DLC was like I was like no, there's no way this is needed for anybody at this point in the game. You know.
Yeah. Then and I'm also talking about like going back and like going to these like old areas that have like these locked areas behind high clearance levels. Like they offered garbage stuff to you, like these level 5, level 6 clearance doors that were locked, or these new areas that you had to levitate to that you couldn't before. Should have given you more stuff. In some cases they did, but in other cases it was just eh. So it's kind of mixed on that part.
Yeah, it's a little
The
bit back and forth. Like some places were just like, oh, it's just like a box. It had like nothing important in it. And then sometimes there was areas that were off the beaten path and ended up being like a whole like boss fight or something. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of the stuff was good, some of the stuff was not so good.
I like the boss fights for the most part. I wasn't expecting like giant boss battles or any of that sort of thing, really, for some reason. But they're nicely welcome, so glad they had it. And sad that the ending didn't have one.
Yeah, I went into it not really knowing what to expect on that front, but doing the doppelganger fight in the mirror and doing the anchor fight and like the Matchbox maze. They were all really cool, like memorable moments.
Yeah,
You ended up finding the rail car like side mission thing too,
the rail car side mission, the one where you had
where
to
you're
activate those items in the right order.
the one where you're chasing the video camera.
Wait, what?
Okay,
No,
maybe you missed
I
that.
missed that. Yeah, missed that.
That was the other music heavy side quest I was talking about.
Sad.
There was that section where um, you found the movie camera that was like in the transport bay and the door wouldn't open until like you got it out of there.
Yeah. I
You
was wondering where that thing went. Like, I
you
wanted
were
to
able
go
to
over
go
there. I'm
find
like,
it and do a mission with it. Yeah.
lame. I just thought disappeared because that door was shut and I couldn't get to him. I'm like, oh, I guess it's just gone. Okay.
No,
Well,
you could get to it because there was once you got past that and you got into like the next, like literally the immediately next area, um, there was like uh two or three different like pathways you could go, and one was going down some stairs, and there was an elevator, and you go down the elevator and you go out this door, and then the camera was like sitting there, but it was out of its contain thing, and she was like, "How did that get out?" And then like you try to go cleanse it, and it leads into this crazy side quest thing.
Oh, dang it, lame. I wish they added more indicators, that sort of thing. Like they did in some of those cases, like when you popped like a new certain thing, it'd be like, new quest popped up, accepted. I'm like, okay, cool, do it. And it was good. But then, yeah, in
And
those
this one
cases,
was,
like, I had
I
no
guess, meant to
idea.
be kind of a hidden Easter egg thing.
And I ran around a lot, in which in some cases, like, a lot of the areas were kind of confusing, yeah, with like the map and stuff. It's like,
Yeah,
can you get
and
here, or is it locked behind a story quest thing? I don't know.
yeah, and that's the kind of thing I think you get into where I talk about like gamer IQ and stuff like that. Like, I've played enough games for enough years that I kind of recognize like the patterns, and realize that like when there's multiple different places I can go off one place, like one of those is always going to be like progressing the story forward, and the other ones are going to be some sort of side area, or it's going to lead to like a chest or something like that. So I tend to like mentally map out all that stuff, and if I think I'm moving forward with the story, I just turn around and go back and be like, wait a minute, now there was an elevator back there that I now want to know what the hell it does, because I feel like this way is going forward into the story. So I ran back and I found it, but I almost missed it. And I don't know if you heard me when I said it at the time. I was like, that's kind of tricky. You could just miss this entirely, because
Yeah, that's
there's not really
the
any indicator that this is here, other than there being an elevator you could call, just kind
yeah,
of sitting there.
that's normally what I did too, but I just missed it. So even if you do a lot of backtracking and stuff, you just miss things sometimes.
Yeah, it
So
wasn't as good
yeah.
as the Matchbox maze, but it was pretty cool.
So yeah, gameplay. Maybe, yeah, about an 8, 7.5, 8.
Yeah, that's what I'm going with. I'm feeling like an 8. I feel like everything was about an 8, which I feel like is solid. It's like could be better, but could be worse. I feel like an 8 is just a solid game. Enjoyed it, and they hit a lot of other like intangible stuff pretty well. Like game length didn't get too long. Because that happens a lot with games anymore, where they just like they try to cram in more hour playtime, thinking that like adds value, but it actually, at least for me, ends up detracting from the value. I get like tired of the game, and I just want it to be over. Uh, this one didn't really get there. It was like just kind of the right length. If it had gone a whole lot longer, I'd probably been like, all right, like I'm done. Because you were, like you said, you were at that point where you didn't really need mods anymore. You weren't getting gun upgrades anymore. Like you would reach the end of the progression. So if they kept shoving like too much like senseless content at you, you've been like, all right, I'm bored now. Like you've pushed it too far.
Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, probably 7.5 total. Mostly because of the impact it had at the end with the story and the characters. Just kind of fell flat.
And that lines up pretty generally with what the game has been reviewed at. It's like 7 to an 8, maybe like a 9 if you really like that setting and stuff like that. Especially the Ultimate Edition, like having like all the content together. I think if you were just playing the base game and didn't have like the Alan Wake DLC and the Foundation DLC, the base game, the way like the story just kind of falls off, probably would have seemed like a, a bit more disappointing because it didn't really have like a big conclusion or a climax. Um, the Alan Wake DLC was really good though. Like,
Yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed that whole bit, especially the boss fight at the end. And like that was like sort of expecting for the actual ending, like a
yeah,
hard boss fight like that.
it's kind of weird too because like the Alan Wake did have that Hartman fight, which was a tough fight that you built up to, and the Foundation had a boss fight at the end where you fought Marshall. She wasn't as hard as Hartman was, but she was still like a boss that was, like you built up to. There and then yeah, you didn't really have like a big boss ender to the base game. You didn't fight like um, you didn't fight your brother. You didn't fight some like crazy hiss monster. You didn't fight the former. You didn't fight the board. You didn't really go out with any kind of guns blazing kind of thing.
No, so I was kind of expecting you to, you mean, fight your brother or yeah, just fight the source of the hiss or something, reach a resolution, but there wasn't. So
Yep, 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 yep. All right, well,
instead, you became God mode and just, mode
yeah,
everything.
you just kind of mowed everything in a weird sort of run and gun battle thing, which wasn't necessarily bad because that's kind of what the Matchbox maze was too. But
It shouldn't be for the ending. That pretty much takes all your
yeah,
progression and is like, it didn't matter because we just made you OP anyway.
yeah, true enough. I like what Remedy
It's a
does
Mary
though.
Sue ending.
I definitely like what Remedy does. I think they make some solid games. Like say, I mean, Max Payne for its time was revolutionary with the bullet time and the combat and everything, and having like a fairly good like gritty story. Um, Alan Wake, same kind of thing. Like for its time, really interesting like storytelling and mechanics and stuff that still holds up. I never got to play Quantum Break, but I want to. Although I heard it was kind of buggy and glitchy and stuff at the time, which is why I didn't really jump on it right away. But I do want to go back and play Quantum Break at some point. I'm sure they fixed it up, and it's probably yeah, it's like an 8 or a 9 on Steam right now. So it definitely got solid reviews as well, and from the fan base anyway. I think it got. I don't think it got like totally like shit on or anything, but I think it got bashed a little bit when it came out by critics a bit because of technical problems and some stuff like that. But um, that's another one I want to go back and play. And then here now playing Control, I feel like again they nail combat like really well, making those core systems enjoyable to play, and their storytelling is solid, but it's never like like I don't know like fucking like Yakuza, like they're just not that kind of storyteller, but but it's always like a solid story that pulls you in and makes you interested in what's going on. So, they're a good one. They kind of fly under the radar, for some reason. Like nobody really talks about them too much, but they really haven't made a bad game that I know of.